Thanks very much, Ian. Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to another Lunchtime Live here on Radio Gibraltar with me, Ros Astengo. As since the start of the school year, barely a month ago, there are now 11 positive cases in 6 schools, resulting in 92 students having to self-isolate and 29 staff members. Today, I'm joined by members of the 2 opposition parties, Edwin Reyes, the GSD shadow spokesperson for education.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And Jackie Anderson from Together Gibraltar.
Good afternoon.
And so today we get the opposition's take on what's happening. How concerned, Mr. Reyes, should we be at these rising numbers at the schools?
It's an interesting question. I think we were all expecting numbers to go up. A lot of talk about second waves and so on. The concerns now is how quickly those numbers are increasing and the rip-on effect that those numbers have. You know, you've given us statistics of the number of students, and obviously teachers are then affected. They either get, unfortunately, the COVID themselves, or they're asked to go into isolations. But by sending a student home to be isolated, it has an effect on the family, the immediate family, the extended family. You know, are those parents recommended to go to work? Is the recommendation that they now isolate themselves? What happens to the siblings? What happens to the huge number of grandparents, you know, that I meet daily outside school gates, you know, especially those who hit the age of 70 and have to follow other specific medical guidelines. So it is a serious concern. It's certainly the talk of the town. You stop anywhere nowadays, and the talk is all to do with that. You know, the health and education issues are so interrelated. You can't separate one from the other.
I mean, obviously, if you're going to send a child home, particularly one that is not feeling well, someone has to be there to look after him. Jackie, how concerned should we be about these rising numbers?
Yeah, I think as numbers increase and positive cases are found, then concern has to increase. Exactly as Edwin has pointed out, there is a ripple effect to the wider society, back to the families, workplace, the workplace, you know, the economy and so on. There are a lot of questions, there are a lot of unknowns, and I think that as a society we need to be in much greater communication with each other, and we need to understand what plans are in place to actually mitigate these increases in numbers. Are the schools following the right procedures? Are the procedures tight enough? Do they need to be improved? So on and so forth. A lot of questions that really do need to be addressed.
Look, I mean, it's fair to say that the virus is in the community.
Absolutely.
We all know that. We all know that we have to live with this. And Gibraltar's not the only country with COVID in the schools. We knew that it was likely to be a breeding ground for the virus. But let's talk about these measures, because the government said before the start of the school year that there would be staggered entry and dismissals, staggered breaks, temperature scanners, smaller groups, hand hygiene routines. Teachers are tested every 7 weeks. I know Together Gibraltar have criticised measures as being sketchy. Can you elaborate, you know, what you mean by these? Because anecdotally, I have heard that, you know, from a number of parents that these measures are actually happening in the schools. Have you heard something different? What's your take on it?
We felt that there were guidelines issued, but that there was a lack of definition to the guidelines. Whilst I appreciate that it's really important to engage with the teams in every school so that they can apply, the measures individually in each school as they see fit best to keep the health and safety of the children and all the staff there. Sometimes rules need to be rules rather than just guidelines. We expect children to keep to the rules at school, and I'm sure that schools, you know, the government can expect, staff and teams and so on to keep to rules. We have heard, unfortunately, that there seems to be a variety of ways in which these rules and measures are applied, and not always consistently across the schools, I think. Certainly social distancing outside the schools has been pretty poor.
Any particular example you'd like to offer?
Well, I'd like to offer, I'm not going to name any names, but a friend's daughter has been at the comprehensive and has explained that there have been times when they have gone into classrooms that there has been no hand sanitizer for use by the children, who are supposed to use hand sanitizer at entering every time they go into the classroom. The same as, you know, the ability to social distance in a closed environment such as the corridors, etc., has been absolutely impossible. We've even had a situation where teachers were, rather than keeping children in their own social bubbles, which I think has been talked about an awful lot over the last few weeks, have actually been encouraging children to mix. Quite happily, because in many ways you need to get to know new kids at your school, and it's great for encouraging development of relationships. Maybe that needs to be rethought in the light of a COVID pandemic.
Okay, Edwin Reyes, what are your thoughts about the measures? Have they been enough?
I've had concerns from members of the teaching profession in that they have not been given ownership, shall we call it, of the introduction of measures. I have no proof that there has not been communication between head teachers and the central top advisors in the Department of Education, but certainly the ordinary teacher in the classroom seems to be reacting on a day-to-day basis on what the head teacher of the day is saying, do this, do that. Yeah, so...
And those concerns have been raised
Tho-
over
those
the
cons-
past few
yes,
weeks, have
those
they?
concerns have been raised. And of course, parents themselves, look, according to the age of your children, there are those who can make their own way to schools, there are those who need to be picked up from schools and so on. In some cases, if we take the secondary schools, because they are sited next door to each other, you inevitably are going to have this huge number of parents waiting for children to come out. But in addition to that, you have this huge number of students coming out, and it's normal that a student from Bayside will leave his school gate and wait for a few minutes for his friend to come out from West Side School. So you have these young adults,
But to be fair, once they're out the school premises, it's a bit difficult for the Department of Education to sort of control
yes,
that, isn't
but
it?
I'm not putting the blame solely on the Department of Education. You see, government has issued legislation whereby they enforce now the wearing of masks if you're outside the school area. But these youngsters who are leaving the school are not being forced to wear the mask. Is it necessary? We need the medical advice on that, because
Or is it a little bit too late? At the end of the day, planning ahead is vital for any government in any sector, working with any sector, education being one of the most important, because, of course, we're looking ahead at the future all the time. That lack of engagement, which I have to echo, because, we've spoken to the teaching profession, and it was the same that was echoed at us. The lack of engagement at early stages, it all seemed to happen a little bit too late, a little bit rushed, right at the end of the summer holidays. And, that means you don't necessarily have plans in place for the what-if scenarios, which is exactly what professionals do when planning ahead for any contingency.
Okay, well, before we tackle online learning and how teachers and students are being supported, teachers being compensated in the classroom with stand-ins and children who are at home having to work online. Before we just come to that, I just want to, Edwin Reyes just touched on the issue of masks. Of course, masks, that was a guideline. I have seen a lot of students not wearing masks. Some do, some don't. Does that work? Does it have to be, all or not? But does this mix of some wearing and some not, does it work?
I mean, in my view, it's best to have either all or not at all. Not at all is clearly not working, because actually I can't recall a single student that I've seen walking, and I do walk along water gardens quite often towards the end of the school day. I can't recall seeing a single student wearing any masks. So guidelines, and I think we all know it, guidelines are not always followed by people. People tend to have to follow rules. That is why we, legislated about seat belts, we legislated about smoking in restaurants and this sort of thing, because people weren't following guidelines. I think it has to be done.
Okay, Mr. Reyes, does the GSD feel that there should be a change in guidelines as regards mask wearing in schools? Should they be compulsory and not just advised?
if there is that medical evidence that masks certainly help tremendously to stop the spread of the virus, then it should become, reluctantly, but it should become something that's compulsory. I think Jackie was right in saying you give someone a guideline and the option is yes or no, it's up to you. It just becomes, a
free-for-all.
A free-for-all. And it becomes, someone gets offended, how dare you come near me, wearing a mask and I am. You don't want to curtail people's liberties, but then, don't expect something to happen, but say, but do it if you want to, but I'll be offended if you don't. That is a big question. Perhaps one has to be a bit draconian in the approach to the issue.
Okay, let's move on to online learning, because during the first lockdown, this wasn't curriculum-based, but many students were supported with online learning at home. Have we advanced in any way. We've had the Minister for Education, the new Minister for Education, John Cortes. He'd only been in the job for literally a few days when he said that, it is something that is being looked at. What's your opinion about where we are with that? Basically, it's not up and running yet, curriculum-based online learning. I don't know what your opinion of Seesaw is, but, what are your thoughts? I know, Edwin, that the GSD has had quite a lot to say about this.
Yes, we were still during the summer holiday period, you want to call it that, when we came out officially saying, you have to get an online learning program in place. Look, the school year has started. What the education examination boards are going to demand of the students who have to do public examinations is still an unknown factor. So we have to be a bit reactive to when they decide that. But it's not just examination classes. It's right up from reception to year 13. Government should have in place by now, or if not, at least start to provide details of what will be happening within the next few days. In respect of online learning, are we going to have live stream classes? Are we going to have packages on demand? There are numbers of students in isolation increasing daily, so you justify daily the need to have this facility for online. There are teachers who could be tasked specifically to prepare an online type of lesson. So you deliver a class, it's better than zero. Yeah, there's nothing to beat the classroom interaction between teacher and pupil. But here we're all making the best of a difficult situation, and parents are not quite satisfied that the best is being delivered. I come from the education world, like many people know, and I was always guided by one of my superiors who, whenever we had to tackle any issue in any academic situation, the starting point was always what is in the best interest of the students. And then we work in solutions towards that. So my question is, what is in the best interest of students? You will find most parents will agree in that lessons have to be delivered in some other shape or form. The shape or form is where we have room for negotiation with the teaching profession.
Yeah.
But certainly, are we delivering the product that our children deserve and rightfully should receive? That is the big question mark. That is the talk of the town.
To your mind, just give me an answer. Are they?
Are they delivering that?
Yes.
No, not at this moment. I haven't found any parent who's satisfied that the best product has been delivered to the
Jackie?
child.
Going a little bit further from that, we mustn't forget that education is considered a human right, a right to education. So where we are in a situation which we cannot avoid, because we're in the middle of this pandemic and we don't know how to deal with the virus just yet, science is working very hard on that, we have a situation where education is being consistently interrupted for individual children, as well as for groups of children and year groups and so on. And as you mentioned about the exams, I think this is going to affect several years' worth of students, probably for the rest of their lives. So we need to mitigate that. And online learning, I think, is part of a package of measures. It's not the panacea for all evils. It's not going to provide everything. It's certainly, in my view, as a former educator, not going to ever replace the teacher in the classroom face-to-face experience. That is really important. But that can be delivered in ways that is much safer to the children than having them all together in classes, in a school building for the traditional amount of time that they normally are, because we're not in a traditional situation. We cannot necessarily now follow the paths that have been set out for us for decades and decades before us. We have to look ahead. And online learning is one form of what I call remote learning, and a whole package of education that can be delivered to all students, whatever their age, whether they are nursery students starting off in nursery care or whether they're in fact adult students perhaps going to university or wanting to take adult classes. Online is a very, very important part of that.
Is it a failure, would you say, on the behalf of the government in that this has not yet been rolled out?
Yes, absolutely. It should have been rolled out not just as a response to COVID, but plans and work should have been in place now for numerous years. The world is going digital and we should be along there with it right up front.
There's certainly no doubt that something should have been in place by now. You may be planning, which is the usual answers we hear. We are now 8 months on since March. 8 months on since the COVID came in. Yeah. Since anyone with any sort of professional input into this, be it medical, be it educational, said this is what's going to happen. And Jack is right. It's not just something that will end come next June or July, the end of the academic year. This will affect students for the next 2, 3, 4 years, God knows.
In particular this year, which is going to be very disruptive.
Yes.
Come exams. I know it's out of Gibraltar's hands. We're led by the
Absolutely.
UK education system, but would you say that they would need extra support to compensate for all the disruption?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there should have been something in place by the start of term in September. I mean, we've had 6 months since the beginning of March. A lot of other countries are putting together platforms. I know that we've got Seesaw. I know that we've got Google Classrooms. I know we've got Edmodo. So that we have got some facilities. What I get anecdotally from parents and from teachers, from the teaching profession, is that these are not necessarily set up in the best and most efficient way for them to be used as learning platforms.
Okay, I'd like to move on to university students. We'll hear from a few of them here. Let's just listen to some of what they're saying, how difficult it is for them over there.
Around 3 days ago, my 7 flatmates and I started to show some potential COVID symptoms, and yesterday we took the decision to go get tested, and later that evening we all got the text message from the NHS that we were positive for coronavirus. I feel as though it were a matter of time now that we got COVID, mainly because Manchester is such a high risk area at the moment. Obviously no one wanted or anticipated a Freshers' Week like we're having this year.
Currently,
Okay, I'm going to have to stop that there because we are running a little bit low on time. Very difficult situation for our university students in the UK. COVID is spreading like wildfire, it seems, and many of them are having to self-isolate. I'm just wondering whether you feel our students are being supported enough, and if there's anything more that the government could be doing to help our students in the UK. Some of them having online lessons that, it's going to affect their year because they're being taught by teachers who aren't necessarily well versed in giving online learning. So they will be disadvantaged. What sort of support can we give these university students, if I can ask both of you?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, as a mum whose daughter was going to go to university just last month and decided to take a gap year, and boy, am I relieved that she did. My heart absolutely goes out to these youngsters. Obviously, we've got children that are returning to university, but we do have, a cohort of students who it's their first time. Some of them are first time away from home. Some of them have yet to receive their grants because there have been problems with that. It's a scary place to be at the best of times when you're quite new. So certainly from talking to other parents, I do feel that perhaps we could have set something up here for them, even if it was just a chat line with the department online. Don't forget, they're young adults, so therefore parents cannot intercede with the university on their behalf, cannot always organise food deliveries to them. They're not allowed out of their halls of residence. Very difficult time for them. My heart goes out to them, and I think we could be supporting a lot more.
Edwin, Reyes.
There's a lot of sense between setting up a particular helpline, online via telephone that students and parents can tap into. Each case can be different, but especially a fresher in university will find themselves living away from home for the first time. That insecurity. Some of them are stuck, like imprisoned, the equivalent of being imprisoned inside their own halls. Some of them are not feeling well themselves, and who's going to go out and buy the basic grocery needs. I've had parents saying, I'm dying to go over to UK to help my son or my daughter, but I won't be allowed into university grounds. So that feeling of support, that someone in the education authority cares about them, that is missing at this moment in time.
And I also feel,
quickly, we do need to
but I
finish.
also feel that some of those freshers particularly have not necessarily had the opportunity to register with doctors and GP surgeries in the UK. They have COVID, they're unwell. What could our department do interceding on their behalf to ensure that they're getting the right medical attention?
We've got to reassure them that we are there to help them. That is the message.
Thank you very much for offering us a different perspective on the COVID situation at schools. The GSD's Edwin Reyes and Together Gibraltar's Jackie Anderson. You've been listening to Radio Gibraltar's Lunchtime Live. It's 2:00.